Thank you for joining us on this gray morning. My name is Richter, and I am the Executive Director of Impact Iran, which is a coalition of 17 human rights organizations focused on the country's situation. As of November 2022, Iran remains one of the leading capital sentencing and executing states in the world. Iran's use of capital punishment remains extensive, discriminatory, arbitrary, and untransparent. It has routinely imposed the death sentence following grave violations of fair trial standards and safeguards. Since September of 2022 this year, the unrelenting and brutal crackdown on ongoing peaceful protesters continues. More than 300 persons have been killed by security forces since the beginning of the protests, including children. Many people have been arrested in a move which raises alarm because some have already been sentenced to death and charged with corruption on earth and war against God, which are vaguely defined offenses that carry the death penalty. Iran has already executed 450 persons since the beginning of this year, up from 300 last year. This week, the World Congress Against the Death Penalty has gathered in Berlin amid declarations from the German government that it would support a special session at the UN Human Rights Council in this month to discuss the current situation in Iran and to possibly establish a UN investigative mechanism to gather, preserve evidence about the allegations of human rights violations in the country. Impact Iran and its member organizations call on the international community to support these discussions and to pay special attention to the use of the death penalty in the country. And it also calls on all member states of the Council to support the establishment of an investigative mechanism. With me this morning, I have 4 experts on the use of capital punishment in Iran. Each one of them will take a few minutes to talk to you about their specific issues of concern, and then we will take some questions. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Mahmoud, Amiry-Moghaddam, Director of the NGO Iran Human Rights, and we have been working on documentation and publication of reports on the death penalty in Iran in the last 15 years, and right now we are also documenting what is going on the streets of Iran. Before starting, my thoughts go to the brave Iranians who are on the streets every day, despite the fact that several hundred of them have been killed. Latest last night, several were killed. One of them was a 10-year-old boy. So, death penalty has been used as a tool to spread fear in the society, to uphold the barrier of fear. As Rose mentioned, number of executions have been increasing dramatically in the past 2 years. According to our reports, in 2020 there were 267 executions, 2021 333, and by this week in 2022 477 people have been executed, and most of these executions, the increase is attributed to the execution of drug offenders. 210 people have been executed for drugs in 2022 compared to 25 in 2020. So that's about 10 times increase. The purpose of these executions is to spread fear. But however, as you know, this barrier of fear has collapsed and people are on the streets. So what the Iranian authorities have responded is to using live ammunition against the people. According to our reports, at least 342 protesters have been killed, including 43 children. Hundreds of these people were killed on the streets of one city in Zahedan in Balochistan's Bloody Friday. This amounts to crimes against humanity. And as it was mentioned, thousands have been arrested. Many of them are facing charges that are punishable by death according to the Iranian law. There is no due process. They are subjected to pressure to get forced confessions, and based on those confessions, they might be sentenced to death. At least 20 are facing such charges, and death sentences of 5 of them have been issued already. So there is a risk of mass executions, because that's what Iranian authorities need. People in the top political positions in Iran, they are the same that were involved in crimes against humanity in the 1980s, so they are capable of doing the same once again, unless the international community sends a very strong warning that execution of protesters will not be tolerated and will have severe consequences. And of course, we think that the mechanism of accountability at the UN Human Rights Council could be one such action, but we hope that all the governments also do their own, send their own warnings to the Iranian authorities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Taimoor Aliassi from Kurdistan Human Rights Association Geneva. Our focus is minorities, Sholeh, the Kurds, Baluchis, Turkmens, Ahwazi Arab, and Azerbaijani Turks since 2006. Before anything, I would like to express my deepest and emotional thoughts to Gina, Mika, Sarina, and 330 other protesters whose lives were taken by the mean of Ayatollahs. I would also like to pay tribute, homage to those 120 Baluchi youths who were massacred by the Islamic Revolutionary Guards in Balochistan in broad daylight on Fridays and in complete indifference of the whole world. My heart goes out also to Baan, a 70-year-old Kurdish girl whose mom was shot dead on the roof of her home in Kurdistan, and also to the other 44 miners who had a full dream of lives ahead but killed by the Ayatollahs. Ladies and gentlemen, in Iran today, hundreds of protesters are killed in broad daylight. The extrajudicial killing of children are becoming a routine. Prisoners are tortured and killed in detention centers without any trials. Musicians are sentenced to death for singing or composing a song in Iran. Members of Iran's parliament call and vote for the death of the people. Imagine they represent the people and they are calling for the killing of the people. Iran's regime not only shut down or cut internet, but also cut electricity and water in some Kurdish cities like Mahmoud, which amounts to crimes against humanity. In such a context, it is impossible to focus only on the death penalty as a separate issue from other forms of violence committed by the regime. In respect to the marginalized minorities, the total number, as my colleague Mahmoud said, is at least 340 protesters killed in Iran in the past weeks. We realized that 2/3 of them are Baluchis and Kurds. 121 Baluchi, and every time I'm adding the number, when I wrote my statement, it was 68, but now it's 78 Kurdish citizens were killed. In regards to Iran's executions, the proportion of minorities killed is similar. Close to half of those executed in 2022 are Baluchis and Kurds. 135 Baluchis and 69 Kurds were killed in 2022. And this is no statistical coincidence. It is like this for many years. Iranian Kurds represent over 55% of those executed in Iran for political and national security related charges in the past 10 years. They represent almost half of those in jails for political opinions. When it comes to the protesters, the regime detained them in basements because the prisons are full in Kurdistan. Example, someone, Yasin, a young Kurdish musician and rapper, who was sentenced to muharba, a charge punishable by death. And all these, while the Kurds and the Baluchis only constitute 20% of Iran's 82 million population. First, there is an unfair trial, if any. Second, they are killed in cold blood and indifference. Third, imagine the pain of the family. The families, and finally, the regime refuses to return the bodies of those executed to their families. The families of Farzad Kamangar, a Kurdish teacher, Haydar Qurbani, Haydar Abdorrahman, and hundreds of others are still awaiting the bodies of their bodies to bury them. The international community has a responsibility to act and to protect all the Iranians, especially those who cannot benefit from protection, including women, children, minorities, and Kurdish population. Ever since 1979, Kurdistan has been pioneer in the fight to defy Ayatollah's rules and to promote values of secular, democratic, decentralized Iran that fully respect women and minority rights, but also its neighbors. We have been bombarding this message ever since with the slogan, Jen, Jian, Azadi, woman, life, freedom. That has now become the war chant of the protesters in whole Iran since the killing of Gina Mahsa Amini, this Kurdish young girl, by Tehran's police morality in mid-September. At the end, I would like to call international community to act urgently to, first of all, protect the Iranians by establishing an international mechanism to investigate the crimes of the Islamic regime and to hold the regime accountable for its crimes. And secondly, to sanction Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps as an entity, not individuals. They are responsible for the repression of the protesters, for the killing not only Iranians, but the Syrians, the Iraqis, the Yemenis, and Lebanese. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hello everyone, and thank you for being here at this time of the day. I was asked to talk about due process of law, and everyone touched upon the violation of due process of law in Iranian court system, and I think it's a very relevant time to talk about due process of law, as thousands of protesters are literally piled up in Iran's overcrowded prisons, under-equipped prisons, lacking food and lacking medication, and many of them being injured. We have already three sentences to death, and so I would like to talk to you about how these sentences are issued, based on what, and talk to you about one particular protester whose case is emblematic, and also talk to you about the judiciary and why, expecting due process of law in the legal system of Iran is not very realistic, basically. So what we have observed in the interrogations of the detainees, whether they're political or arrested on drug charges or on theft charges of theft or any other charges, there are differences between cities and provinces where minorities are imprisoned. Obviously, the laws of Tehran do not apply to minorities, so accused are routinely tortured. The techniques include flogging, slapping, kicking, beating with hoses and pipes, use of stress positions, verbal humiliations, insults, threats against family members, and we have the mother of a young woman who was executed a few years ago here, and she probably could tell you about threats to her daughter during interrogation that made her confess to what she had not done. I think it's important to hear the relatives of victims and hear their stories, because that's how the world will understand what exactly happens inside Iran's prisons. So binding of limbs, suspension, shaving of heads, public humiliations, and much more. Accused are routinely denied legal protection. They have no, although the law a few years ago kind of opened the door to the presence of attorneys during interrogations, we know of no case where an attorney was present during interrogations, whether for political or ordinary crimes. Oftentimes, in politically motivated cases, which are that of the protesters today, lawyers have to be chosen from a list of lawyers provided by the judiciary. The judiciary itself issues licenses for lawyers, goes around the Bar Association to issue licenses for lawyers, and oftentimes we hear from detainees that they saw their lawyers just before the trial, just a few minutes before the trial, that the lawyer hadn't necessarily had access to the case file or hadn't taken the time to read the case file, and that in many cases, especially in times like now that protesters are many, they are tried in numbers, like the judge sits there and he has 15 people, and in drug cases it's the same thing. There are mass trials, and in drug-related cases, oftentimes the attorneys are not allowed to speak. They're only allowed to submit their written defense. Up to a few years ago, the drug offenders didn't have a right to appeal. They just had the right to demand pardon. But now they do, and yet, you know, the number of people executed is really high. And the judgments, you know, first of all, the judiciary now is reluctant to provide the accused and the convicts the text of the judgment. Their lawyers have to take notes. Many of them don't have the text of the judgment to give us, right? But when we do, like it's a one-pager, death penalty, the judge, you know, gives you a one-pager, or several pages for several people, and then, and evidence is irrelevant. Evidence, I mean, I can't generalize to all judges. Some judges have more professional ethics than others. But, you know, evidence may or may be relevant. The judge can use, in the absence of sufficient evidence, the law allows the judge to use his own judgment. And I say his because women can't be judges in Iran. And, you know, judges have to be Muslims. Non-Muslims cannot be judges. So the judges are representatives of God. So they have a lot of leeway to interpret the law. So personal judgments, and so the case of Mohammad Obadlu, a 22-year-old protester who was just sentenced to death, is also of interest to tell you how easily people can be sentenced to death. So the judiciary has decided on order of the Chief Justice, who is selected by the Supreme Leader, to accelerate the process of punishing rioters, which that's what they call them. Obadlu is sentenced to death for having killed a police officer. Now, Obadlu, whose mother has come to social media to plead for him, is reportedly having some mental challenges. I don't know if disorder, if he's not, I mean, I don't know what nature of these issues are. But what is sure is that he has been on a highway, hit 6 security officers with helmet who were going on their motorcycles, right? So he has just turned his car and hit them. And so the police report, so the lawyer, out of frustration, has put some of the excerpts of the police report, the hospital, and other things on the web, on Twitter. He has tweeted. That's what they do because, you know, they have nowhere to go in the Iranian judiciary to fight, to complain or for their complaint to be heard. So they, you know, he tweeted. And so you see that the police officer who is supposed to have been killed by this young man was taken to the hospital 4 days after he was arrested. The hospital report says that he has died. He has no injuries on his body, but he has died from a head injury on the top of his head. Now, all of these people have helmets, right? So, you know, the police reports of the accident or the attack of this young man says that 6 police officers have been injured on their bodies. No mention of anyone being injured on the head. And then there is a video of the funeral of the policeman who, and in the video, everyone is crying and they say, you know, this martyr was cornered when he was alone and no one was there and he was beaten to death. So any of this is relevant? No. The judiciary just issued, I mean, this information came out days ago, right? And yet, yesterday, he was sentenced to death for having injured 5 officers and killed 1. So that's where, that's what we are dealing with. So, and why? Because the judiciary in Iran was not meant to dispense justice. It was meant to protect the revolution and protect the revolutionary leaders, and that's where our problem. The revolutionary courts that are issuing these statements are meant, they function, they were born out of the law, and they are there to undermine the rule of law. So, you know, we really need the international community to understand this and take the necessary measures so that Iranians have somewhere to go, you know, when they are victims of injustice, but also we need the media to be more interested in these stories, to be more interested in individual cases, and extract themselves from the nuclear negotiations and the real politics and come and look at the realities on the ground. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roya. I'm Raphaël Chenuil-Hazan, the Executive Director of ECPM, Together Against Death Penalty, the organizer of the World Congress Against Death Penalty. And when we organized the World Congress, we didn't expect to organize this press conference. And unfortunately, it arrived, the World Congress happened at a very critical moment in Iran. So that's why we decided to organize this conference today. Iran is and has always been the worst example of the use of the death penalty for political purpose. It was one of the first plenary sessions thematic, the instrumentalization of the death penalty for political purpose. And in Iran, you have all the examples of this instrumentalization. And we arrive nowadays, in my opinion, in our opinion, to the third phase of the Iranian past months events. The first phase was the time for mobilization and awakening the demonstration of a young generation toward the Iranian regime. The second phase was the time of repression of the demonstrations and the protesters, or the so-called rioters by the regime. And nowadays, today, we are at the third phase face the time of terror. The time of terror from the regime, and the death penalty is the tool for this time of terror. And it is so essential that international community and the international public opinion make pressure on the Iranian regime. Otherwise, the Iranian regime will believe that they can do what they want on this repression, because this is the only way for them to save the regime, to save their own situation. We are nowadays in a historical moment in Iran, because there is no way back, no possibility to come back. Now the regime has to be tough on the repression, and they are going to execute extrajudiciary, but also judiciary killings with the death penalty. I have to remind you, and I know that all of you already know, that recently at the parliament in Iran, 200 members of the 227 members of parliament asked to use the death penalty to shut down the rioters, the so-called rioters. And we don't need to be historians of the Iranian past 40 years to remember that the past 40 years has been years and years of executions and mass killings. In 1988, during all the students' demonstrations in 2000s, in the Green Movement, after the Green Movement, and so on and so on. But now the difference, the regime is at the end of his history. And like when you have, how do you say, bête blessée, wounded animals, it could be very dangerous for the Iranian people. So we really call the international community. We have this special session at the UN Human Rights Council next week. Very important moment to have a momentum on the Iranian situation. But we need media. We need media to put awareness for the public opinion, worldwide public opinion. I would like as well, to finish, because I don't want to be long, and I would like to let you the opportunity to have some interviews, some questions. I would like to mention, and it has already been mentioned, that we are here, Sholeh, the mother of Reyhaneh who was condemned to death and executed in 2014. It was not related to the recent demonstration, but it's also to express that, as Roya already said, behind all these figures there is men and women, and especially this time many, many women, and not only women, girls, young girls, who are facing injustice and death penalty. So I really want, it's important to have also potential testimony, if you need, for your newspapers and media. And I would like to, 1 minute, give the floor to Richter, who is a member of the ECPM board, but he has also have launched in France an interesting initiative with more than 50 famous French women who have filmed themselves cutting their hair. Cutting their hairs in solidarity of Iranian people and Iranian women. And we are talking today about solidarity. Richard, if you want to say one.
Yes, very quickly, thank you, Raphaël.
also the biggest executor of women, with at least 185 executed since 2010. I know some of them from these numbers, 185. Some of these women, I met them. And I met also some other women who are not in this number. Because, for example, I know Amiry-Moghaddam, not in this number. I know Mahmoud, not in this. Chenuil-Hazan, not in this number. And in other side, I want to tell you, one of these 185 was my daughter. My daughter has a picture, not a number. She had love, she had family, she had friends, desire, and a lot of other things. These 185 people, just since 2010, and just women who named, and you have the number, and a lot of people are not in this room. Please find the persons. I know this young man. I show his name is Mahmoud. I show his picture in one protest in Berlin. When you have a picture, you know who is he or she. You are not working about numbers. You are not mathematical. You are human rights activists. So find the pictures, find the name. Say my daughter, Reyhaneh, Mahmoud has some hopes for future, for working, for make a family, for have children, for long life. But now he has one issue for death penalty, and they will kill him, I know. And I know when we have a lot of protesters arrested, and now they are in Evin and the other prisons, in future we will have a big number of executioners. Please help them. My daughter, gone, never come back, but maybe we can help them to come back to life. And now we need that. We need every active act, every small act to save them. In next week, UN make a big meeting, and you can support these people and do something, because we don't want next 10 years say, hey, thousands of people executed in Iraq, oh, and we didn't do something for them. Now it's time for act. They wait for you. When my daughter was in the sentence, death penalty, when I found her name in one small magazine outside of Iran, I found a hope. My heart was warm and say, oh, I am not alone. Somebody in the other side of the world are thinking about me. That's the truth. In that time, I didn't know, nobody can help me, because your action was not enough for save my daughter. So now we must stay and act for them. and a lot of people who we haven't their name. Thank you very much for being here with us, and thank you very much for your action, from smallest action to biggest action.